Hi, this video is an introduction to Guilford County Schools' Personalized Learning Navigators. Hopefully, you are familiar with this image, Guilford County Schools' Personalized Learning Triangle. It is GCS's North Star for Personalized Learning Environments, or PLE as we'll refer to it in this video. The PLE triangle is GCS's North Star because it contains the three fundamentals of PLE: know the learner, guide with standards, and flex the environment. Like the North Star, the PLE triangle is a reliable guide for finding direction. In this case, which direction will move you deeper into PLE. What guiding stars don't tell you, however, is what the landscape looks like that you'll have to navigate in order to follow them. So, GCS uses a second tool called a navigator to help you understand what the landscape looks like in the journey into PLE. There are two navigators, a condensed navigator and an expanded navigator. The condensed PLE navigator looks like a puzzle with 8 pieces. Each piece represents a strand of related instructional practices. Each piece also combines with one or more other pieces to form a process. You'll notice, for example, that the assess strand and the target strand form the plan process. You'll also notice that each instructional practice is connected by these circle icons back to one or more of the fundamentals represented in the PLE triangle. Let's compare this to the expanded navigator. The expanded navigator contains the same instructional practices, strands, and processes as the condensed navigator, but it unpacks the instructional practices a bit and organizes them into a progression from those that direct learning, to those that guide learning with choice, to those that facilitate student-led learning. While you have a choice between the condensed and the expanded PLE navigators, we encourage everyone to start with the condensed PLE navigator because it is simpler and more straightforward. Thus, for the remainder of this video, we will discuss the strands and processes using the condensed navigator. Once the condensed PLE navigator no longer gives you the guidance you need to grow, that will be the time to move on to the expanded navigator. So let's begin. As GCS organizes PLE, there are 3 major processes: plan, implement, and manage. First, I need to figure out what I'm going to do. That's plan. Then, I need to do it. That's implement. And all along the way, I need to prepare the people and resources involved in the planning and the doing. That's manage. Now that we have the 3 processes, let's look at the 8 instructional strands. Within the plan process, there are 2 instructional strands: assess and target. The instructional practices in the assess strand all address how to figure out where your students are, personally and academically. That means everything from interest, learning styles, and culture, to which standards they have and which they need to work on. The target instructional practices, meanwhile, revolve around developing learning activities that will reach the students where they are at that moment. Targeting instructional activities also include developing learning goals and learning maps to help drive and track students' learning. Moving on to the implement process, we find that it is comprised of 4 instructional strands: group, engage, release, and blend. These instructional practices in the group strand focus on putting together students whose personal and academic needs are similar, and then structuring each group's learning activities to meet the specific needs represented in that group. The smaller the group, the more targeted learning can be, all the way down to a group of 1, the individual student. In the engage strand, the instructional practices seek to motivate students to be proactive and vigorous in their learning. This means tapping into intrinsic motivators, such as natural interests, as well as extrinsic motivators, such as recognition. The instructional strategies in the release strand are all about scaffolding students' independence. When students are more independent, they are less dependent on the teacher, which frees the teacher to spend more time in the places where he or she adds the most value. In the blend strand, the instructional practices seek to integrate technology into learning and communication, starting with places where technology is simply more efficient and working up to ways where technology enables things that weren't possible before. The final process is manage, and it is comprised of 2 instructional strands: culture, and environment. In the culture strand, the instructional practices focus on establishing norms in your student community that support personalized learning. And last but not least, the instructional practices in the environment strand seek to develop physical and digital spaces that make personalized learning possible within and without your classroom walls. Each of these 8 instructional strands and the instructional practices they include work together to push, pull, prod, and support PLE in your learning environment. Now, as you use this navigator to move deeper into PLE, notice that the instructional practices in each instructional strand are what we have called them, instructional practices. They are not strategies or methods. Strategies or methods are the specific things you do to implement the instructional practice. This is more than a meaningless theoretical debate about vocabulary, as I'll explain in a moment. First, let's look quickly at an example. One of the instructional practices in the assess process is formatively assess frequently. There are many ways to formatively assess. These might include a ticket out the door, oral questions to check for understanding, using technology to poll the class, or a deliverable that demonstrates at a glance that a student understood the lesson. So, while 2 teachers may both formatively assess students on a frequent basis, they will likely use very different strategies or methods to do so. The reason that the distinction between instructional practices and strategies is important is because there is no right way to personalize learning, i.e., there are different strategies or methods you can use for every one of these instructional practices. So, while the same instructional strands and the same instructional practices work together for every teacher to push, pull, prod, and support PLE, what this looks like in action for you will be different from what it looks like for others because of the strategies and methods you use. Meanwhile, which strategies and methods you use will depend on who you are as a person and as an educator. It will depend on the culture of your school, the content you teach, and perhaps most importantly, it will depend on the students whom you have the privilege of teaching. Thus, PLE will look different from school to school and from teacher to teacher. It will even look different from year to year for the same teacher, because each new year, students bring in a different mix of personal and academic needs. In short, we all use these same pieces to the puzzle. But what our puzzles look like when we assemble them to create our learning environments will be very diverse. The PLE triangle and these navigators, however, will help you find your way closer to PLE so that you can assemble your puzzle in your own unique way.